Part 68. Let her experience the feeling of mental breakdown, and taste the powerful psychological suggestions. While their thoughts were wandering, a group of people came to the Zhongren mansion. When they walked into the sect's mansion, a chill suddenly hit, and the surroundings were gloomy, and it always felt that countless grievances were staring at them coldly, as if they were going to drag them into hell when they were unprepared. Eunuch Yun walked at the front and led them to their destination. The whole group was speechless. Walking in the dark and damp passage, only the sound of footsteps echoed in their ears, and the surroundings were strangely quiet. Yi Yang was made to feel nervous by this strange atmosphere. But fortunately, Eunuch Yun, who was walking at the front, finally stopped, turned around and said to Jun Yi, "Your Majesty, the imperial concubine is behind this door, and is asking them to come out for trial. Or are you going to interrogate them, Your Majesty? Go in and have a look." Jun Yi stepped forward, just about to open the door of the cell, when he suddenly thought that Yi Yang had seen Jun Ao killed before, and he was so frightened that he turned pale and vomited. So, he did not want Yi Yang seeing this cruel picture, kindly said, "Concubine Yi, don't go in. After all, the picture is too bloody. I'm afraid that concubine Yi can't stand it." Being looked down on, Yi Yang was upset, with a fearless expression on his face, and he replied, "I've come here. Of course, I want to go in and have a look. Besides, I haven't seen anything in the world. So would I be afraid of this?" However, what he said was too full. With the smell of blood coming from his nostrils, he almost covered his nose and turned around and ran away. Fortunately, he still wanted to save face, and stood on the spot to try his best to control the discomfort in his throat. Eyes fluttering around, I saw several eunuchs tied to the pillars. Their bodies were dripping with blood from the whips, and they were so angry that they were horrible to watch. The worst part was Xiao Luji, who didn't have a single piece of intact skin on his body. And the wounds were still bleeding from the wounds, which made him look particularly pitiful. Looking at the tragic images of these eunuchs, Yi Yang felt a little unbearable. But thinking that these people framed him, his unbearableness was quickly replaced by anger. If he did not meet Jun Yi, who was sensible, but the emperor who was irritable, he might be the one who was bound and whipped here. "Emperor, the concubine has been wronged. The concubine did nothing, and I begged the emperor to bypass the concubine." Bai Jie's shrill cry came suddenly, instantly attracting everyone's attention. Yi Yang followed the voice and saw that Bai Jie's gorgeous clothes were stained with stains, and there were also several welts on her body. The body tied to the pillar by big objectification struggled hard, trying to break free from the rope that bound her. "Your Majesty, it's all the imperial concubine who instructed the concubine to do this. It's all the fault of the imperial concubine. Your Majesty, you can go around the concubine this time. This concubine promises that there will be no next time." Bai Jiyu shed tears and begged bitterly, to the point of being somewhat pitiful. "Bai Jiyu, are you still a man? Do you have a good conscience for wronging this concubine so much?" Shu Qianhe on the side roared angrily. "In my heart, I scolded myself for being blind, and I found such an idiot as a partner. You originally instructed me to do this." Bai Jiyu was shedding tears, more squeamish than Shu Qianhe, and Yi Yang's heart froze. At this moment, he actually admired Shu Qianhe a little. She was clearly tied to a pillar, but her beautiful face showed no trace of panic. She ignored the crying Bai Jiyu and looked at Jun Yi, "Your Majesty, why did you send someone to arrest your concubine to the ancestral mansion, and ask the emperor to give an explanation to her concubine? It's really a dead duck. It's already this time. You still don't do it. Do you want to use a severe punishment?" Jun Yi looked gloomy, and what bothered him the most was Shu Qianhe. Shu Qian he once did several heinous things in the East Palace. But in the eyes of the minister of the Ministry of Household, he chose to ignore it. He didn't expect that she would now have the ability to make a bad move against Yi Yang. Why, Your Majesty? Do you want your concubine to make a move? Shu Qian he's mouth curled into a sneer, convinced that Zheng Yi had nothing to do with her. She knew that Zheng Yi had no clear evidence to prove that she was behind the scenes, so she dared to be so rampant. In the past, she ordered someone to push a little talented girl into the icy lake water, so what if there were witnesses? She stubbornly said that she didn't send someone to push it. Isn't it okay? Do you think I dare not torture you? A trace of anger appeared on Zheng Yi's face. This Shu Qian he was challenging his bottom line again and again. Is it a trick? If this is spread, the concubine is afraid that the emperor's reputation will be bad. Shu Qian he's charming lips raised a touch of irony, and under the dark yellow candlelight, she looked extraordinarily arrogant. Since she can't get a little love from Zheng Yi, she will use this method to make Zheng Yi remember herself forever. Arrogant, arrogant, so arrogant. This is the first time Yi Yang has seen such an arrogant woman. Since he is so arrogant, he will let her experience the feeling of mental breakdown. Your Majesty, this concubines have a plan. So that the imperial concubine can confess all crimes without resorting to criminal law. He still doesn't believe that he can't cure this idea, people who harm themselves. Seeing Yi Yang's confident expression, Shu Qianhe's heart trembled, and became anxious. Yi Yang, what do you want to do to this concubines? What? Only the imperial concubine is allowed to persecute me, and I am not allowed to pay homage to the imperial concubine. Is it? As the saying goes, it is rude to come and go. And it is inappropriate to come. Yi Yang smiled a little horribly. What is the saying? Why haven't I heard it? Zheng Yi silently complained on the side, but seeing Yi Yang's confident expression, he knew that he had the means to force Shu Qianhe to confess her guilt, so he didn't say anything. Yi Yang, you dare. This concubine is the imperial concubine of the East Palace. If something happens to this concubine, I am afraid that you will not be able to bear it. Shu Qianhe looked at Yi Yang's penetrating smile, her face pale with fright. She knew very well that Yi Yang had many tricks, so she was afraid that Yi Yang would come up with extremely tortuous tricks to torture herself. Yi Yang, if this concubine has a little injury on her body, you can't escape the end of being criticized. He will have a bad reputation of fornicating with eunuchs and extorting confessions from good people by torture. Tisk, tisk, the imperial concubine, you think of me too badly. You are as beautiful as flowers and jade. Suddenly feeling the icy aura of the people around him, Yi Yang quickly swallowed all the compliments in his mouth going back. He replied in a serious tone, Your high status, imperial concubine, how dare I use torture on you? He turned around and handed over to Zheng Yi. Your Majesty, I ask you to hand over the matter of interrogation to the imperial concubine. This concubine is here to interrogate. Zheng Yi also wanted to know what method Yi Yang used to force Shu Qianhe to speak. And nodded. Okay, leave it to concubine Yi to deal with it. Thank you, Your Majesty. After Yi Yang thanked the emperor, he said to Lord Zhongling, Sir, is there a small black house? Yes, Lord Zhongling replied. That's the trouble for Lord Zhongling to invite the imperial concubine to the small dark room. Yi Yang's attitude was so polite that it was impossible to pick out a single fault. Yi Yang, what do you want to do? Shu Qianhe became even more flustered when she heard the little black room, wondering what Yi Yang wanted to do when she locked her in the little black room. Is it just a lockdown? No, no, no. It can't be that simple, so what exactly does Yi Yang want to do? Thinking of all kinds of terrifying insults, Shu Qianhe's petite body couldn't help shaking. Yi Yang ignored her and watched indifferently Shu Qianhe being thrown into a small dark room by the officers and soldiers. Yi Yang, if you dare to let people insult this concubine. Even if this concubine becomes a ghost, I will not let you go. Shu Qianhe lost her arrogance and yelled at Yi Yang. I'm the emperor's concubine. How could I do something like a beast? Yi Yang satirized Shu Qianhe and satirized her as a beast. She even bribed the eunuch to slander him. Such shameless things can only be done by beasts come out. Shu Qianhe was at a loss for words, but she didn't know how to refute Yi Yang's words. Yi Yang didn't quarrel with her. He said coldly, "Come here, tie up the hands and feet of the imperial concubine, and then cover the eyes of the imperial concubine." "Yi Yang, what are you going to do?" Shu Qianhe asked angrily. "If the imperial concubine is afraid, you can recruit everything you have done, and I will let you go." Yi Yang knew that if Shu Qianhe didn't confess, he would always be charged with cheating with eunuchs. Thinking beautifully, Shu Qianhe's pretty face was slightly cold. She looked at Yi Yang, her eyes bursting with strong hatred. "Yi Yang, this concubine tells you that even if this concubine is dead, I will let you carry his own secrets on your back. I'm not guilty of this. You've got it. Now it's your turn to be shy. I hope you can keep it up. Don't beg for mercy from this lord." Yi Yang was no longer talking nonsense, and looked at Shu Qianhe with her hands and feet tied by several officers and soldiers, and she was blindfolded, eyes closed, and one hand tied high to the chain on the wall. "Yi Yang, what do you want to do?" Shu Qianhe struggled for a while, but didn't break free. It seemed that she was tied tightly. Yi Yang didn't reply. He whispered to an officer to fetch a bucket of water. He squatted in front of Shu Qianhe, and said softly beside her ear, "Imperial concubine, I'll open your wrist later. Let the blood flow out drop by drop until there is no more blood in your body. You dare to let me die?" Shu Qianhe didn't believe that Yi Yang would let her die. "You don't confess. And I can't do anything about you. Since I'm going to be charged with fornication, I might as well kill you to relieve my hatred." He saw the officers and soldiers brought a bucket of water. And he took it bucket, put the water on the stool in the corner. Jun Yi on the other side is blank, wondering what Yi Yang wants to do. After doing everything, Yi Yang turned around and walked in front of Shu Qianhe, and said sensibly, "Imperial concubine, if you go back on your words, remember to confess early. Otherwise, when the blood dries up, even if Deluo Jinxian comes, he will not be able to save you." "Yi Yang, do you think this concubine is afraid of death?" "Home, you underestimate this concubine." After being arrested, Shu Qianhe never thought that she could still live, so even if she died, she still wanted Yi Yang to carry the notoriety behind her back. "The sound is over for the rest of my life. I just kindly remind the imperial concubine, oh right, the blood in this human body is limited. If it flows to tomorrow morning, even if the imperial concubine begs for mercy, there is no way to save you." Yi Yang took it from the officers and soldiers. He took a small knife and placed it on Shu Qianhe's wrist, and the back of the knife slashed hard, causing Shu Qianhe's brows to frown in pain. "Imperial concubine, enjoy your last life." Yi Yang got up, went to the bucket in the corner, poked a small hole with a knife, and then greeted everyone to leave the small dark room. Jun Yi wanted to ask Yi Yang what he was doing, but Yi Yang gave him a silent gesture, motioning him not to speak. Then closed the door of the small dark room, and retreated the officers and soldiers outside the door, leaving only one standing guard. When the group returned to the front yard of the Zhongren mansion, Yi Yang said to Lord Zhongling, Lord Zhongling, I will trouble you to call every half an hour later. Why? Lord Zhongling was stunned. He couldn't see through Yi Yang's st at all. He clearly said that he wanted Shu Qianhe to bleed to her death, but he only slashed Shu Qianhe's wrist with the back of the knife. What about playing? Remind the imperial concubine that she has very few days left. If Shu Qianhe was afraid of death, she would definitely do it. If she was not afraid of death, he could only think of other ways. I don't understand what trick you are playing. Jun Yi shook his head, thinking that Yi Yang was useless. It seemed that punishment was still required to get Shu Qianhe to confess. It's just that once the punishment is used, it will be a trick. Yi Yang's life in the palace will not be as good as it is now. Your Majesty, you may not know how powerful psychological cues are. Once a person is invaded by inner fear, he can't get rid of his inner fear. Cowardly people may be scared to death by the fear that they weave. Yi Yang only hoped that Shu Qianhe has a strong heart. Don't be scared to death by herself. Jun Yi was skeptical, but did not refute, but focused on Bai Jiyu and the others. Since Shu Qianhe doesn't confess, let Bai Jiyu and the others accuse Shu Qianhe. With so many witnesses, he doesn't believe that the ministers in the court can confuse right and wrong. As for Shu Qianhe in the little black room, she never thought that time would be so long, but she felt as if several hours had passed. Especially the surrounding silence, only her own blood dripped on the ground and made a click sound, which made her feel unprecedented fear. Pata, another drop of blood, fell to the ground, and Shu Qianhe felt that her wrist hurt even more, especially the fixed hand, which was cold and gradually lost consciousness. Another drop of blood flowed out of Pata, as if it was ringing in the ear. The sound was so loud that it seemed to burst the eardrums. And Shu Qianhe's face turned pale with fright. Suddenly, the clock outside sounded, and hearing that it was 3 o'clock in the night, Shu Qianhe's face turned pale again. If it was according to what Yi Yang said, wouldn't she bleed out and die in the o'clock? At this moment, she prayed for time to slow down a little bit, and she didn't want to die. Her heart was gradually occupied by fear, thinking of the pain of suffocation in death. She began to struggle, trying to break free from the rope that bound her. Stop struggling. The more you struggle, the faster the blood will flow. Yi Yang's voice sounded outside the door. She was about to scold Yi Yang. Yi Yang then said, Yeah. Why are you so pale? How much blood is there? Tisk, tisk, there is such a big pool of blood on the ground, there should not be much blood. Don't you feel the panic of suffocation? I remember someone said that when a person is about to die, it will be difficult to breathe. It's okay not to say it. After speaking, Shu Qianhe instantly felt difficult to breathe. She gasped for breath, trying to breathe more air, but the suffocation in her chest made her collapse. She didn't want to die. She didn't want to die. The psychological defense line was broken in an instant, and she broke down and said, I don't want to die, please spare me. I don't want to die. Facing the feeling of fear alone, it's too scary. Unless you confess, Yi Yang said. You help me stop the bleeding first, and I'll confess. No. If I help you stop the bleeding and you don't confess, I'm not at a loss. I really did it, please help me. Stop the bleeding. I feel, I'm about to die. So uncomfortable, I feel like I can't breathe. Shu Qianhe gasped, and the suffocation in her chest became stronger and stronger. You continue to waste time. It's not me who died anyway. Yi Yang dropped these words, and the surrounding returned to the previous silence. She was so frightened that her face was pale, and she roared, I recruited, and I sent people to frame young master concubine Yi. He didn't fornicate with the eunuch to do cowardly things. Jun Yi outside the door saw Shu Qianhe, who collapsed and confessed to all the crimes, with a look of admiration, obviously not using any punishment, but the smart and strong Shu Qianhe did it. When Lord Zhongling outside the door heard Shu Qianhe's confession, he was amazed at the horror of this psychological suggestion. He quickly took Shu Qianhe's criminal evidence, went into the small dark room, and asked Shu Qianhe to sign it. Shu Qianhe drew her signature with trembling hands, and panted heavily, "Help me. Call the imperial doctor. I'm about to die. I don't want to die." Yi Yang stood aside and saw that Shu Qianhe's signature was postponed. He ordered someone untie Shu Qianhe's rope. Once freed, Shu Qianhe didn't remove the black cloth on her eyes first, but hurriedly covered her aching wrist with her hand and pleaded, "I've already confessed, please help me to pass on the imperial doctor. I don't want to death." At this time, she had long since lost her previous arrogance. Yi Yang stepped forward, lifted the black cloth strips on Shu Qianhe's eyes, and joked, "Is the imperial concubine so brave?" Shu Qianhe's attention was not on Yi Yang at all. She quickly looked at her own wrist. However, when she saw that there was no wound on her wrist, her face was dull. At this moment, she realized that she had been deceived by Yi Yang, and roared out of anger, "Yi Yang, how dare you lie to this concubine?" Yi Yang just laughed. Anyway, Shu Qianhe had already pleaded guilty and was detained. There is no need to talk to her anymore. Shu Qianhe saw that the bucket in the corner was still dripping with water. Her face was ashen with anger. She gritted her teeth and said, "Yi Yang, don't be complacent. Then this concubine said that you helped this concubine to paint the prisoner while this concubine was asleep. How can you take this concubine?" Yi Yang knew for a long time that Shu Qianhe was the one who didn't cry without seeing the coffin, so he smiled grimly. "It's all right. The big deal will send you to the person you once killed. In front of the grave. I believe that those who have grievances will not let you go so easily. How dare you?" Shu Qianhe was really frightened. Since she was a child, she believed in ghosts and gods. And she was most afraid of the ghosts she killed whom they trouble her. "Don't I dare? I seem to know a Taoist priest with a high level of Taoism. I will let him conjure your soul for you. Yi Yang. This concubine has fought with you." Shu Qianhe rushed towards Yi Yang with a grim face. How could the officers and soldiers on the side come forward and subdue her to the ground as she wished? Unable to move, Lord Zhongling glanced at Jun Yi, who was not angry and arrogant, and saw that there was no pity on Jun Yi's face. He knew that Jun Yi had no love for Shu Qianhe as husband and wife. So he quickly asked the officers and soldiers to send Shu Qianhe to the cell and wait. Shu Qianhe can be publicly tried at dawn.